What if the greatest decade in cinema has been reduced to the same 20 movies repeated forever? The 70s gave us famous blockbusters, but it also produced strange thrillers, forgotten westerns, daring dramas, and disturbing experiments that quietly disappeared. Tonight, we are opening the vault and uncovering 18 movies Hollywood almost allowed history to erase. Before we begin, please like this video, share it with another classic film fan, and subscribe to our channel. Number 18. Fright, 1971. A quiet babysitting job becomes a sustained exercise in dread in this early British home invasion thriller. Amanda arrives at the isolated house of Helen and Jim, expecting to spend the evening watching their sleeping child. Helen appears unusually nervous and gives Amanda instructions that seem far more serious than the situation requires. After the parents leave, small disturbances begin. A sound outside might be the wind. A movement near the window might be imagination. Then Amanda learns that Helen's former husband, Brian, has escaped from medical supervision and may be searching for the child he believes was taken from him. The sequence most often remembered begins with Amanda sensing someone beyond the glass. The film delays a clear view, using reflections, curtains, and darkness to make the audience study every corner of the frame. When Brian finally enters the house, the story becomes less about guessing whether danger is present and more about Amanda protecting the child while staying calm. Susan George gives Amanda a believable mixture of courage and terror, while Ian Bannon makes Brian unpredictable rather than cartoonish. Director Peter Collinson would later be remembered more widely for The Italian Job, leaving this smaller film in its shadow. Fright appeared several years before babysitter thrillers became a familiar horror formula. Many of its ideas would return in more famous productions, but this tense early example was rarely given credit. Every genre has forgotten foundations. Later filmmakers build on an idea, improve the marketing, and receive the historical credit. The earlier picture remains beneath the structure, holding everything up while almost nobody remembers its name. Fright is one of those foundations, modest, direct, and much more influential in spirit than its reputation suggests. Number 17. Demons of the Mind, 1972. Inside a decaying European estate, Baron Zorn keeps his adult children, Emil and Elizabeth, almost completely separated from the outside world. He claims the isolation is necessary because madness runs through their family. His fear soon becomes its own form of cruelty. Emil is physically restrained, Elizabeth is placed under constant control, and the household operates according to Zorn's unstable beliefs. When a doctor arrives with new psychological methods, it becomes unclear whether he can help the family or whether he is merely entering another layer of their delusion. The film's strongest sequence involves the strange treatment designed to uncover the source of the family's condition. Hypnosis, memory, and inherited guilt mix together as the characters attempt to decide whether their suffering comes from illness, abuse, or something supernatural. Robert Hardy plays Zorn as a man who may genuinely love his children, but has allowed fear to turn that love into imprisonment. Patrick McGee brings theatrical intensity to the doctor, while Shane Bryant and Gillian Hills make the siblings both sympathetic and dangerous. Hammer Films promoted its name as if audiences were receiving a conventional monster story. Instead, the movie offered psychological horror, family trauma, and ambiguous explanations. It was reportedly given weak placement on a double bill, which helped it disappear. Its reputation deserves recovery because it shows Hammer attempting to move beyond familiar creatures and confront a more uncomfortable monster, damage passed from one generation to the next. Studios often claim they want experimentation, but they become nervous when the finished film cannot be sold through a familiar image. Demons of the Mind looked like gothic horror but behaved like a family nightmare. Rather than embracing that difference, its distributor treated it as a problem, and another daring 70s film slipped quietly toward obscurity. Number 16. The Creeping Flesh, 1973. A scientist returns from New Guinea carrying the enormous skeleton of an unknown ancient creature. Professor Emmanuel Hildern believes the discovery may reveal the physical source of human evil. When water touches one finger of the skeleton, flesh begins growing around the bone. Rather than recognizing the warning, Hildern removes material from the creature and develops a serum that he believes could protect people from destructive behavior. His daughter Penelope becomes the subject of his desperate experiment. Hildern fears that she has inherited the condition that affected her mother, so he injects her without fully understanding what he has created. Her personality quickly changes, and the professor's attempt to prevent madness may be the very thing that releases it. The regeneration scene remains the film's unforgettable image. Rain falls on the skeleton as skin slowly spreads across its bones. Practical effects and careful lighting make the process feel both scientific and ancient. Peter Cushing gives Hildern a mixture of tenderness, ambition, and panic. Christopher Lee plays his institutional rival and half-brother, a man whose respectable appearance hides his own cruelty. Although it resembles a Hammer production, the film came from Tygon. That similarity may have worked against it, causing viewers to treat it as just another Gothic picture. Its final twist, however, changes how the entire story can be understood and leaves viewers questioning which version of events was real. The best forgotten films often contain one image that refuses to disappear. You may forget the actors' names or the order of events, but the sight of flesh growing across ancient bone remains lodged in the mind. For years, viewers remembered that scene without knowing which movie it came from, a perfect example of a film vanishing while one fragment survived. Number 15. The Shout, 1978. During a cricket match at a psychiatric hospital, a patient named Crossley tells a visiting man an extraordinary story. He claims that while traveling in Australia, he learned how to produce a shout powerful enough to end a person's life. Crossley says he entered the home of experimental composer Anthony Fielding and his wife Rachel. Anthony records unusual sounds, hoping to create music from everyday noise. Crossley challenges his confidence by claiming that sound can become a force beyond art or science. The celebrated beach sequence provides the film's title with frightening meaning. Crossley orders Anthony to cover his ears, stands on the empty shoreline, and releases the shout. The landscape seems to buckle beneath the sound as animals collapse and Anthony loses consciousness. Alan Bates plays Crossley with calm authority, making it impossible to decide whether he possesses supernatural power or simply understands how to control vulnerable people. John Hurt brings nervous intelligence to Anthony, while Susanna York makes Rachel's growing connection to Crossley deeply unsettling. The story is presented as a memory told by an unreliable patient, so every scene may be true, exaggerated, or completely invented. Even the ending refuses to offer a comfortable explanation. Despite winning attention at Cannes and becoming one of the earliest British films to make major use of Dolby sound, The Shout gradually slipped away. Its slow rhythm and deliberate uncertainty demand patience, but the beach scene remains one of the decade's most powerful uses of sound. Most horror films fear silence, believing audiences must constantly receive music, dialogue, or sudden noise. The Shout understands that sound becomes more frightening after silence has prepared the space for it. Once viewers have witnessed Crossley's demonstration, every whisper and distant noise feels like the beginning of something capable of tearing the world apart. Number 14. The Medusa Touch, 1978. When novelist John Morlar is discovered barely alive after a violent attack, investigators initially assume they are dealing with an ordinary crime. French detective Brunel begins interviewing Morlar's psychiatrist, Dr. Zonfeld, and discovers a history of unexplained disasters. Morlar believed that his thoughts could cause destruction. People he hated suffered terrible accidents. Buildings collapsed and events occurred exactly when his anger reached its highest point. The psychiatrist initially treated these claims as delusions, but the number of coincidences becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. Richard Burton plays Morlar with controlled bitterness. Through flashbacks, he appears not as a traditional supervillain but as a furious man convinced that society deserves punishment. Lino Ventura's Brunel remains skeptical until evidence forces him to reconsider what Morlar may still be capable of doing from his hospital bed. The movie's largest sequence involves a cathedral filled with important visitors. Morlar focuses his mind on the structure while doctors and investigators race to stop a disaster that has not technically begun. The building shakes, stone breaks apart, and panic spreads through the ceremony. The effects are ambitious, but the quieter scenes between Burton and Lee Remick provide the real tension. The film asks whether Morlar created the tragedies or merely sensed them before they occurred. Released during a crowded period for supernatural thrillers, The Medusa Touch was often treated as a lesser genre item. Its severe mood and bleak final suggestion deserve another look. Burton's performance gives the film a weight that its sensational title does not suggest. He speaks as if every disappointment has been stored inside Morlar for decades. By the finale, the frightening question is not whether one man can destroy buildings with his mind, but what would happen if rage itself suddenly became a physical force. Number 13. Phase 4, 1974. After a mysterious event in space, ants in the Arizona desert begin behaving with extraordinary intelligence. Different species stop fighting and organize themselves into a single expanding colony. Scientists Ernest Hubbs and James Lesko enter a sealed research station to study the change. They initially believe human technology will allow them to control the situation. The ants respond to each experiment, learning from traps, solving obstacles, and creating strategies that appear designed to study the scientists in return. The movie's most famous visual sequence shows the ants communicating through geometric structures built in the desert. Their towers and circles look like alien architecture, even though every piece has been created from soil by familiar insects. Graphic designer Saul Bass directed the film, his only feature. His background can be seen in the precise compositions, extreme close-ups, and strange visual patterns. Instead of using oversized creatures, Phase 4 photographs real ants in ways that make their ordinary movements seem organized and unknowable. A young woman named Kendra becomes caught between the humans and the colony, leading to a final act that suggests the ants are not simply defending themselves. They may be planning a new stage of life on Earth. The original ending was reportedly altered, reducing the full impact of Bass's vision. Poor box office results ended his feature directing career, but the movie's design and serious approach to insect intelligence have earned it a loyal following. There are no roaring monsters here, only small creatures moving with purpose. That restraint makes Phase 4 more unsettling than many expensive spectacles. Humans enter the desert assuming they are conducting an experiment, then slowly recognize that they may be the organisms under observation. The movie vanished, but its central reversal remains brilliantly modern. Number 12, The Last Wave, 1977. Sydney lawyer David Burton accepts a case involving a group of Aboriginal men accused after the mysterious death of another man. At first, David treats the matter as a difficult but understandable legal problem. Then the weather begins behaving strangely. Heavy rain falls without warning. Dark water appears inside familiar spaces. David experiences dreams involving one of the defendants, Chris Lee, and starts discovering connections between the case and images that have followed him since childhood. Richard Chamberlain plays David as a rational professional whose confidence gradually collapses. David wants every event to have a legal, scientific, or psychological explanation, but the people around him understand that his questions may involve knowledge he was never prepared to receive. One of the film's most memorable scenes occurs when water pours into David's home. The comfortable modern house becomes part of the same threatening natural force appearing in his dreams. The barrier between prophecy and reality seems to dissolve. Director Peter Weir builds the film around atmosphere rather than conventional explanation. David Gulpilil gives Chris a quiet authority, though modern viewers should also recognize that the film approaches indigenous beliefs through the perspective of a white central character. The Last Wave received international attention, but became overshadowed by Weir's later successes. Its haunting rain, underground chambers, and apocalyptic final image still make it one of the strangest films produced during the Australian New Wave. Water appears everywhere in the film, but it never feels cleansing. It leaks through the structures David trusts, his house, his profession, and his view of history. By the time the final vision arrives, the audience shares his uncertainty. Is he seeing the future, remembering the past, or confronting something that modern society tried to bury? Number 11, Long Weekend, 1978. Peter and Marcia travel into the Australian wilderness, hoping a camping trip will repair their failing marriage. Instead, they bring their resentment with them and direct much of it toward the environment. They leave rubbish, damage plants, fire weapons carelessly, and treat the landscape as if it exists only for their entertainment. Gradually, nature begins responding. Birds circle the campsite. Insects appear in impossible numbers. An eagle attacks, a snake enters their camp, and the cry of an injured sea creature echoes from somewhere beyond the trees. The film's most memorable element is not one attack, but the feeling that the entire landscape has become aware of the couple. They repeatedly attempt to leave, only to become lost and return to places they thought they had escaped. John Hargreaves and Bryony Behetz make Peter and Marcia unpleasant without turning them into simple villains. Their marriage is already broken, and the growing fear strips away whatever politeness remains between them. Unlike animal attack films that introduce one oversized creature, Long Weekend makes every part of nature feel connected. Wind, water, and animals operate like a single patient force. The movie received limited attention during its original release, and became known mainly among Ozploitation fans. Its environmental warning, however, has grown more relevant. The frightening idea is not that nature suddenly becomes cruel, it is that nature has finally decided to respond to human behavior. Their punishment does not arrive through a supernatural judge. It comes through ordinary animals, bad decisions, and a landscape the couple never bothered to understand. Long Weekend transforms careless behavior into suspense, suggesting that humanity's greatest mistake is assuming the natural world will remain silent simply because it has remained patient. Number 10, The Silent Partner, 1978. Toronto bank teller Miles Cullen notices something suspicious about a man dressed as Santa Claus inside the shopping center where he works. Miles realizes the man is preparing to rob the bank and quietly develops a plan of his own. When the robbery occurs, Miles hides much of the available cash and allows the criminal, Harry Reichel, to escape with a smaller amount. Police believe Reichel stole everything. Miles appears innocent and secretly keeps the difference. The plan seems perfect until Reichel learns that someone cheated him. Christopher Plummer plays the robber with startling coldness, while Elliot Gould makes Miles clever, awkward, and increasingly desperate. What begins as an opportunistic theft becomes a battle between two men who both believe they can predict the other's next move. The first robbery remains one of the film's most memorable scenes. Holiday decorations, cheerful shoppers, and the criminal's Santa costume create a playful surface, while Miles makes a decision that will place everyone around him in danger. Later twists involve Miles's colleague Julie and another attempt to move stolen money without attracting attention. The screenplay constantly changes which character appears to hold the advantage. Although The Silent Partner is one of the strongest Canadian thrillers of its period, it received uneven international distribution. For years, many viewers knew it only from occasional late-night television screenings. Its clever structure and sharply contrasting lead performances make its neglect difficult to explain. Perhaps the Christmas setting worked against its reputation. Seasonal movies are expected to be warm or comic, while this one uses decorations as camouflage for greed and intimidation. Yet that contrast is exactly what makes it effective. The most dangerous figure in the building looks like someone children have been taught to trust. Number 9. The Laughing Policeman, 1973. A gunman attacks passengers aboard a San Francisco bus, leaving investigators with a confusing group of victims. Among them is police detective Dave Evans, whose reason for being on the bus is unknown. Detective Jake Martin, played by Walter Matthau, joins Leo Larson, played by Bruce Dern, to investigate. Their personalities clash immediately. Martin is controlled and exhausted, while Larson is confrontational and often insensitive. Yet both understand that the attack was probably not random. The investigation leads through informants, old cases, and people connected to an earlier unsolved crime. Rather than building toward a single genius criminal, the movie presents police work as a slow process of locating one useful fact inside a mass of incomplete information. The bus attack is the film's most famous sequence. It is presented with sudden confusion rather than heroic action. The ordinary night journey becomes a crime scene in seconds, establishing a bleak tone the movie never fully releases. Matthau was strongly associated with comedy, making his tired, serious performance especially effective. Dern creates tension even when his character is simply asking questions. Released during a wave of gritty police pictures, The Laughing Policeman struggled to separate itself from more famous titles such as The French Connection and Serpico. Its complicated plot and grim atmosphere may also have limited repeat viewing. Still, its view of detectives as flawed workers rather than invincible heroes remains convincing. The title suggests humor, but the joke is bitter. It refers to a novelty song connected to the case, an innocent sound given a darker meaning by circumstance. That is typical of the movie's world, where ordinary buses, conversations, and friendships can hide connections that investigators understand only after irreversible damage has already occurred. Number 8. The Late Show, 1977. Aging private investigator Ira Wells lives in a Los Angeles that seems to have moved on without him. His clothes, methods, and sense of professional honor belong to an earlier era of detective stories. When a former colleague arrives at Ira's home and dies after being attacked, Ira begins investigating. The case leads him to Margot Sperling, an energetic talent agent whose kidnapped cat has pulled her into a larger scheme involving stolen property and dangerous people. Art Carney and Lily Tomlin create the film's greatest strength. Ira wants silence, order, and direct answers. Margot fills every quiet space with questions, ideas, and emotional reactions. Their partnership begins through irritation, but gradually becomes affectionate. One of the funniest and most revealing scenes involves Margot refusing to stay outside the investigation. Ira tries to treat her like a troublesome client, only to realize that her knowledge and persistence may be essential. The mystery contains the expected elements: betrayals, missing property, and hidden motives. But the movie is really about two lonely people forming an unexpected connection. Robert Benton directs with respect for classic film noir without turning the story into empty imitation. The Late Show earned strong reviews and award recognition, yet it never became a lasting popular title. It was neither a broad comedy nor a hard-edged thriller, leaving it between audiences. Its warm character work makes it one of the decade's most satisfying forgotten mysteries. Most private detectives pretend they need nobody. Ira has spent so many years performing that role that solitude has become his ordinary condition. Margot does not simply help him solve a case. She disrupts the emotional routine that allowed him to believe isolation was independence. Their friendship is the mystery's real solution. Number 7. Night Moves, 1975. Private investigator Harry Mosby is hired by a former actress to locate her missing teenage daughter, Deli. Harry finds her in Florida, living among stunt performers, pilots, and people whose relationships are more complicated than they first appear. He returns Deli to her mother, apparently completing the job. Then tragedy reveals that the disappearance was connected to something larger involving smuggling, deception, and an object recovered from the sea. Gene Hackman plays Harry as capable but emotionally confused. He can trace other people's secrets while failing to understand what is happening inside his own marriage. His wife is involved with another man, and Harry approaches that discovery like a case he would rather not solve. The movie's most famous moment comes during its final sequence on the water. A boat circles helplessly, as Harry discovers the truth inside a submerged aircraft. He has finally understood the conspiracy, but his knowledge offers no clear escape. Arthur Penn fills the film with the disillusionment of post-Watergate America. Characters lie without grand purpose, institutions offer no stability, and every solution uncovers another form of loss. Night Moves developed a respected critical reputation, but it never entered popular culture like Chinatown, released the previous year. Its title, quiet pacing and deliberately unsatisfying answers may have kept casual audiences away, yet its final image of a man moving in circles remains one of the defining endings of 70s noir. Harry spends the film trying to move forward, but every discovery brings him back toward his own failures. The circling boat is not simply a suspense image. It represents a detective who can see the truth clearly and still cannot identify the direction that would carry him out of it. Number 6. The Hired Hand, 1971. After years of drifting, Harry Collins decides to return to the wife and daughter he abandoned. His friend Arch Harris travels with him, though neither man knows whether Harry's family will accept his return. Hannah, Harry's wife, refuses to welcome him as a romantic hero. She has managed the farm alone and survived the consequences of his absence. If Harry wants to stay, she tells him, he must work as a hired hand rather than immediately reclaiming his place as husband. Peter Fonda directs and plays Harry with unusual quietness. Warren Oates gives Arch warmth, humor, and loyalty, while Verna Bloom makes Hannah the moral center of the film. Her anger is never treated as an obstacle Harry simply deserves to overcome. The film's most beautiful scenes use slow dissolves to show work, landscape, and the gradual rebuilding of trust. Rather than rushing through a conventional reconciliation, the images suggest that time and labor are changing the relationship. Conflict returns when Arch is captured by men connected to an earlier dispute. Harry must decide whether to protect the fragile home he has regained or leave again to help his friend. Released after Easy Rider, the movie disappointed viewers expecting another rebellious road adventure. Its lyrical pace contributed to poor commercial results. Fonda's directorial debut later gained critical respect, but it still remains far less known than his acting work. Harry's tragedy comes from understanding responsibility only after years of avoiding it. The Western landscape no longer represents freedom. It represents the distance he placed between himself and the people who needed him. Returning home is therefore more difficult than any gunfight because it requires him to accept that forgiveness cannot be demanded. Number 5. The 7-Ups, 1973. Nipped officer Buddy Minucci leads a plainclothes unit targeting criminals whose convictions could produce prison sentences of at least 7 years. His team operates aggressively, relying on informants and pressure rather than polished procedure. Buddy's childhood friend Vito begins kidnapping organized crime figures and demanding ransoms. Because the kidnappers imitate police behavior, the victims assume Buddy's unit is responsible. Suspicion spreads through both the criminal world and the department. Roy Scheider gives Buddy the same physical intensity that made his supporting work in The French Connection memorable. However, this character is more isolated. His reliance on Vito as an informant becomes a personal weakness that professional experience cannot correct. The film is best remembered for its long car chase through New York. Vehicles race across crowded streets, scrape past traffic, and continue beyond the point where most movies would have ended the sequence. The chase concludes with a collision staged as a sudden wall of metal. Producer Philip D'Antoni directed the movie after producing Bullet and The French Connection. That connection may have hurt its reputation because critics treated the 7-Ups as an imitation, rather than recognizing its own grim characters and carefully staged action. It performed modestly and became a cult title instead of a mainstream classic, yet its practical chase work, winter locations, and sense of moral exhaustion make it one of the strongest urban crime films of the period. Modern action sequences often announce every major stunt through editing and music. The chase in the 7-Ups feels dangerous because the cars appear heavy, difficult to control, and surrounded by real streets. The excitement comes not from invincible drivers but from the possibility that one ordinary mistake could end everything immediately. Number 4. The Yakuza, 1974. Former detective Harry Kilmer returns to Japan when an old military friend asks for help rescuing his daughter from a criminal organization. The request forces Harry to confront relationships and obligations he left behind after the Second World War. His former love Eiko now lives with her brother Ken, a man who once opposed Harry but agrees to assist him. Ken follows a strict personal code. Harry gradually understands that events he interpreted as rejection decades earlier were shaped by sacrifices nobody explained to him. Robert Mitchum gives Harry a tired dignity, while Ken Takakura makes Ken controlled, precise, and emotionally powerful. Their uneasy partnership becomes the center of the film. The most memorable action sequence involves Ken using a sword during a confrontation, while Harry fights beside him with a firearm. The scene contrasts two methods and two cultural traditions without reducing either man to a simple stereotype. Later, a quiet act of apology becomes more important than the action. Harry finally recognizes the full cost of the past and attempts to accept responsibility according to Ken's understanding of honor. Sidney Pollack directed from a screenplay credited to Paul Schrader, Leonard Schrader, and Robert Towne. Despite that talent, the film underperformed. Audiences expecting a straightforward gangster picture received a slow drama about loyalty, shame, and cultural misunderstanding. Its reputation has improved, but it remains far less widely known than the careers surrounding it suggest. The Yakuza is not merely about entering the Japanese underworld, it is about discovering that an old personal story was built on incomplete information. Harry arrives believing he must repay one debt, then discovers that his entire understanding of the past is a debt owed to other people. Mitchum's silence carries the revelation beautifully. He does not become a different man through dramatic speeches. He becomes someone who finally understands what his choices cost. Number 3. The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, 1976. Cosmo Vitelli owns a small Los Angeles nightclub where performers present elaborate routines to an audience that rarely seems impressed. Cosmo treats the club as a grand artistic institution because admitting its limitations would threaten the identity he has built. After celebrating the payment of an old debt, he loses heavily during an evening of gambling. The people who control the debt offer him a way out. He must eliminate a man they describe as a minor criminal target. Cosmo accepts, only to discover that the assignment is far more important and dangerous than he was told. His journey to carry it out is awkward, tense, and stripped of conventional gangster glamour. Ben Gazzara makes Cosmo charming, vain, and deeply sad. Even after being injured, he returns to the nightclub and worries about the performance continuing. The show is his defense against fear. The scene most viewers remember is not the central crime but Cosmo standing near the stage, bleeding beneath his clothes while introducing his performer, Mr. Sophistication. He maintains the appearance of control even as his life collapses. John Cassavetes released the film in a long version in 1976 and later created a shorter edit. Initial audiences rejected it, perhaps expecting a cleaner crime thriller. Instead, Cassavetes used noir to examine masculine performance, artistic pride, and self-deception. The movie is now respected among cinephiles, but it remains obscure to general audiences. Cosmo's tragedy is not that he cannot escape criminals, it is that he cannot stop performing the man he believes himself to be. Every evening, Cosmo asks an indifferent audience to believe his club is special. Eventually, he begins needing that belief more than they do. The criminal plot exposes what the nightclub already revealed. His world survives through illusion, and he will accept almost any danger rather than allow the curtain to close. Number 2. Wake in Fright, 1971. Schoolteacher John Grant works in a remote Australian settlement and dreams of returning to Sydney. At the beginning of the holiday period, he travels to the mining town of Bundinyaba, planning to stay one night before catching a flight. The residents welcome him with relentless friendliness. Drinks appear faster than he can refuse them, and the expectation that he participate becomes a form of pressure. John enters a gambling game hoping to win enough money to escape his teaching contract. Instead, he loses nearly everything. Trapped without funds, he falls into the company of local men, including Dr. Doc Tyden, played by Donald Pleasance. The following days become a disorienting descent through alcohol, humiliation, reckless behavior, and violence against wildlife. The gambling sequence is the first major turning point. Coins are tossed, crowds shout, and John's confidence rises before collapsing. The scene turns chance into a machine that seems designed to remove his identity. Gary Bond makes John educated and arrogant, but also vulnerable to the fear of appearing weak. The town does not imprison him with locked doors. It traps him through hospitality, shame, and his own decisions. The film was praised at Cannes but performed poorly and later became difficult to locate. At one point, original materials were believed lost before elements were recovered and restored. Wake in Fright is now recognized as a major Australian film, yet it remains unknown to many viewers. Its terror comes from showing civilization as a thin performance that can disappear after one bad night. John spends the film insisting that he is different from the people around him. The more desperately he protects that belief, the more completely he joins their behavior. Bundinyaba does not create a new person. It removes the social advantages that allowed John to hide parts of himself from his own view. Number 1. The American Friend, 1977. Jonathan Zimmerman is a quiet picture framer living in Hamburg with his wife and young son. He also believes he is seriously ill, making every decision about money and security feel urgent. At an art auction, Jonathan insults American dealer Tom Ripley by refusing to shake his hand. Ripley responds indirectly, helping criminals spread false information that Jonathan's condition has become worse. They then approach Jonathan with an offer: carry out an assassination in exchange for money that could protect his family after his death. Bruno Ganz makes Jonathan frightened, moral, and increasingly separated from the ordinary life he wants to preserve. Dennis Hopper's Ripley appears reckless and strange, but he gradually becomes fascinated by the man he helped manipulate. The train sequence is the movie's most famous passage. Jonathan must approach a target inside a moving carriage, while passengers, doors, and narrow corridors turn every step into a risk. The plan begins falling apart, forcing Ripley to become directly involved. Their relationship develops into an unlikely friendship built on lies. Ripley has created Jonathan's crisis, yet he also becomes the person most determined to keep him alive. Wim Wenders adapted Patricia Highsmith's Ripley's Game while blending German locations with American film noir influences. Directors Nicholas Ray and Samuel Fuller appear in supporting roles, turning the movie into a strange meeting between generations of filmmaking. Although widely admired by critics, The American Friend never became a mainstream crime classic. Its shifting languages, deliberate pacing, and emotional ambiguity may have limited its audience. Yet few thrillers show more clearly how one lie can force an ordinary man to become a stranger to himself. These movies did not truly vanish. They were simply pushed into the shadows while louder successes claimed the decade. Yet every forgotten print, strange performance, and unforgettable scene proves that cinema history is much larger than the films repeated on television. Which title surprised you most, and which forgotten 70s movie should have made this list? Share your choice below, like the video and subscribe, because the next lost classic may be waiting in your own memory.